Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 5 to Thrive Live. I'm Karolyn Gazella, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Dr. Lise Allschuler. Hello, Lise. How are you?
Hello, Karolyn. I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
How about you? How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, I'm gonna go camping tomorrow. I'm totally into camping this year.
That's
So yeah,
exciting.
I know I'm super psyched. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Well, hey, I'm excited about our show tonight, and I'm sure you are because we've had this topic come up before. You and I, in fact, have talked about this very thing, and I think it's because you're a little obsessed about the topic because you're a little obsessed about getting enough sleep.
It's true. It's
Yes,
true.
well, you know what? You come by it honestly. I am as well, and I think the more sleep deprived we get for whatever reason, the more obsessed we get with trying to get good sleep. And 1 in 3 Americans are not getting the recommended 7 hours of sleep each night. So that means 1 out of every 3 people listening to this show are not getting enough sleep. It's a big problem. So we're going to just dive in, give some strategies to folks. But before we do that, can you thank our sponsors?
I would love to, beginning with Cetria, a patented form of glutathione, clinically proven to raise blood glutathione levels. Glutathione is the master antioxidant and the body's primary defense against free radicals. It also helps support respiratory health. For more information, visit cetriaglutathione.com. Also, cognizant acetylcholine, which is nature's way of keeping the brain's energy-producing centers firing on all cylinders. If you're looking for a way to enhance your brain function, including memory, focus, and attention, look for Cognizant on the label or go to cognizant.com for more information. ProThrivers Wellness Brain is a product that contains Cognizant as well as other brain-supporting nutrients and herbs. You can find ProThrivers Wellness Brain online at pureformulas.com. There's also ProThrivers Wellness Sleep, which combines higher dose melatonin and other sleep-supporting natural ingredients specifically designed for thrivers. You can find ProThrivers Wellness Sleep also at pureformulas.com. And Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, it's a best-selling probiotic for more than 30 years, and it contains 12 probiotic strains that are shelf-stable. So no refrigeration is required because of a unique 3-year fermentation process. It's a very effective probiotic. Learn more at drohhiraprobiotics.com. Okay, Lise, as you mentioned, the reason I'm so sleep obsessed is because I have really struggled over the years, just like so many other people. But based on the research, I've made getting a good night's sleep a top priority. So before we dive into our strategies, let's talk about why sleep is so important. So, Lise, what does the research tell us about the health benefits of sound sleep? Or if you would like, tell us about what happens to our health when we don't get enough sleep.
So this is a very fair question because it wasn't until relatively recently that we, the collective greater we, determined that in fact there was a health benefit to sleep. Almost every living species sleeps. So obviously it serves some function, but nobody could really figure out why. Why do we have to sleep? And what we have discovered is that there are very important things that happen during sleep that only happen during sleep and that are essential to our health. So for example, there are certain genes, which are called clock genes, which are regulated by the 2 primary hormones that control our circadian rhythm, melatonin and cortisol. And the secretion of melatonin is really only occurs in the dark and at night. And then the secretion of cortisol tends to occur during the day. And so when our cells bind these 2 different hormones, there's messages that are translated intracellularly, and then various genes are turned on or off. And in fact, a lot of the genes that are turned on during sleep, which is the time of melatonin, are genes that are involved in very critical functions related to cell repair, cleanup, restoring our antioxidant levels, the lymphatic system in the brain, which is a way that our brain kind of cleanses itself. So a lot of very important maintenance functions occur only during sleep. So that's one critical thing. And another thing that we know there's all these different parts of sleep. There's these sleep cycles, and these sleep cycles are actually very important as well. They are different things happen during those different parts of the cycle. And one of the things that happens during sleep is dreaming. And we used to think of dreaming as just kind of a nice, cool thing. There's some ways we can interpret dreams, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, dreaming is a very important way for us to organize, to incorporate, to kind of come to terms with, if you will, the experiences of our day. Some people argue that it's also a way that we tap into the greater collective unconscious. And regardless, dreaming is a very important way to maintain sanity because of that kind of processing. So really, in the end, sleep is important for health maintenance and for maintaining sanity.
Mm-hmm. I do find it interesting that um, even though you're sleeping, it's really one of the most active times of the body. And I also find it interesting that lack of sleep can be so detrimental. Your body goes into insulin resistance. You gain weight if you have poor sleep. You have a weakened immune system. You mentioned the brain. Our cognition can suffer. Our mental health obviously can suffer. So, yes, sleep is really it's really significant, and it's really, really important. If you're going to do one thing for your health, focusing on sleep is a great place to start. So, okay, Lise, when you're talking to your patients about sound sleep strategies, what are some of your favorites that may apply to many, if not most, of your patients?
Okay. So first, I would actually counsel patients not to rely on certain medications, especially the benzodiazepines. These are things which include drugs like Ativan, that's commonly recommended for sleep, that's lorazepam, or alprazolam, which is Xanax, or what's another common one, estazolam, which is Prosom. Like, these are all things that people are recommended or prescribed to help them sleep, and they are sedatives, but they're very addictive. And they're very hard to stop taking once you start. It's very, very difficult to get off those. So people become dependent on them. And interestingly, the more often people use these, we'll call them hypnotics. That's another way that this category of drugs is referred to. The more often that people take hypnotics, the higher their risk of death. And specifically, they're higher the risk of death from things like cancer. So they actually adversely affect our health, which is peculiar. You would think, why would something that increases sleep actually decrease our longevity? And in fact, it's thought that the reason for that is that these hypnotics don't support a healthy sleep cycle. So they cause sort of a certain ability to fall asleep and go into maybe shallower forms of sleep, but not cycle into REM and into deep sleep and up and out. And that because we're not actually cycling through as we sleep on these hypnotics, we're not getting the benefits of sleep. So that's one of the first things that I counsel my patients about. And I know that was probably not what you were looking for, but I'm going to give you a shot at this. What do you think that is important?
I actually really am glad that you brought that up, because I was shocked when I read the research about these medications and the fact that they increase cancer and that they decrease longevity, and it is in fact because of the quality of sleep. So when we're looking at sleep strategies, we want to look at not just quantity, the number of hours, but also quality. So I'm very happy that you brought that up, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
So I am going to talk about magnesium and L-theanine. So I personally have noticed over the years that there's a big difference when I take 400 milligrams of magnesium for sleep at night, and then I combine it with 200 to 300 milligrams of L-theanine. And here's why. Let's start with magnesium. Magnesium is so critical. It's involved in more than 300 different enzyme systems in the body, which impact such a diverse variety of chemical reactions that influence our health on many levels, including sleep. So specific to sleep, magnesium does help with not only the quantity, but the quality of our sleep. But what I like about magnesium the most is that it helps with all of these other issues, brain function, mental health, and just a lot more. So you're really getting a big bang for your buck with magnesium. And the reason I have added L-theanine in the past, I specifically use sun-theanine because that's the brand that's been used in a lot of the studies, is because my sleep issues have often been related to anxiety. And the research is clear that L-theanine helps ease anxiety. But L-theanine and sleep is not just about anxiety. L-theanine has many mechanisms of action when it comes to sleep. It slows our brain activity. It increases relaxation neurotransmitters like GABA. It increases melatonin levels, which is important and which we've discussed. And interestingly, new research is showing that the combination of magnesium and L-theanine is really helpful. And there was a study that was done in 2022 showing that magnesium, when it's combined with L-theanine, it actually enhances the effectiveness of the L-theanine, specifically when it comes to sleep. So I feel like magnesium and L-theanine are so beneficial on so many levels that adding it to your regimen before you go to bed at night is pretty powerful, and it's going to benefit your health in a lot of different ways, not just helping you get sound sleep.
Love it. And I love that you mentioned the combination of these two things, because I think that this is important. In fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody who is an avid Instagram listener, watcher, and a lot of times people, whether they have expertise or not, will tout a particular thing. And if you just look up at magnesium, you look at a monograph, if you will, of magnesium, you'll see all sorts of benefits. And so these Instagram people will talk about all these benefits, and then people will listen and think, okay, I need to take magnesium. But that's sort of out of context, because usually these compounds work best in combination with other things. That's particularly true of vitamins and minerals. They almost always work in concert with other vitamins and minerals. So you're not going to get the full benefit if you just take one thing. So that's one aspect. The other is that sometimes there are these synergisms between, for example, L-theanine and magnesium, where they really work in concert much more effectively. So in reality, as much as you can say magnesium is associated with better sleep, which is true, it's really going to be more effective if you combine it with something like L-theanine. So I'm really happy you talked about both of them.
Good.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have another strategy?
Well, so I'm going to talk about one thing, and just to contradict myself, no, actually, I'm going to context it to be truthful. I want to talk about botanicals, because I think there are some plants that have really a beautiful way of interacting with our nervous system to improve sleep without any habituation effects, without any addictive qualities, without any hangover or side effects. And again, there are many botanical formulas on the market that combine of these herbs together, and those synergistic formulas can be magical. So you might see an herbal formula that has things like passion flower, chamomile, scutellaria or American skullcap, California poppy, ashwagandha, kava kava. So look for these things, because even though these formulas necessarily have less of each one, that synergism that happens, we sometimes call this the entourage effect, where there's like this this combination of things that create a greater effect than any one little component or one herb. And these combination products can be quite remarkable. Having said that, one I would like to highlight for a moment is kava kava. So kava kava is part of the pepper family, and it comes from the Polynesian Islands, the South Pacific. It's used there ceremonially in as a way to encourage people to develop a relaxed socialization with one another. And there's a whole ceremonial way in which kava is prepared, which involves how it's harvested very respectfully to the kava plant. You use the roots, so the way it's dug up is very ceremonial. The cleaning process is very ceremonial, and then it's a very traditional form is the kava root is sort of chewed, then the interaction of the kava and the saliva activates the kava to some extent, and then people spit into this communal bowl, and then the next person spits in. You get this kind of communal kava that's then used. That's an example of sort of a traditional ceremonial use. And I just want to say that because a lot of our modern used plants actually do have this rich and important historical tradition. The modern use, or the Western, I should say, use of kava is, in fact, as a sedative, but kava is unique. So it has the ability to create a feeling of calmness. It's very good to reduce anxiety, and it's also a muscle relaxant. So a lot of people who hold their tension, their anxiety in their muscles, they get tight neck, tight shoulders. When they're anxious, kava is kind of perfect for them. And it typically, and it can be used in a very dose sensitive way. So a smaller dose of kava is more anxiolytic or anxiety reducing. A slightly larger dose within therapeutic range is more sedative, but it affects the limbic system. So it actually not only creates sedation, but it creates a sense of almost not euphoria, but well-being. So it improves people's mood. And I think a lot of times when people don't sleep well, they just start to feel lousy about life. And this is a very useful plant to address that despondency and that tendency to be kind of withdrawn from their own life. Kava can restore an engagement in living, at the same time having this very gentle but very noticeable sedative effect, anxiolytic effect. There's a little bit of concern about kava being toxic to the liver, but in fact, if you're getting your kava from a reputable company that's been around for many decades and sells products and has sold products for a long time, they're going to be very careful about their kava and how they prepare it. Good quality kava that's prepared appropriately and then dosed appropriately is quite safe and is really not a concern. And yeah, and you'll see oftentimes kava combined with valerian. Those two together are particularly potent. They kind of address the anxiety and the sleep together in a really nice way. So that's one of my favorite plants.
Wow, that's really cool. Kava has not been on my radar. I have not written about kava in years. So I'm really glad that you brought kava up. And I would agree about the botanicals and the botanical combinations. There are just some really great formulations out there. So very good, very good.
Yeah, and just one quick comment on that, because some people listening might be, still thinking, but it's supposed to be toxic. And just to say one other thing on that, the research on the reported cases on kava toxicity really only occurred when people were using excessive doses, or they were also doing something else that was very liver toxic, drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, or taking a hepatic drug damaging medication. But when kava is used in the therapeutic dosage range, which is typically recommended on the bottle that you're using or by your healthcare practitioner who's trained in this, there's really no reported or known safety concerns.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. Well, I would like to talk about melatonin. But I want to talk about melatonin from a little different perspective. So melatonin is perhaps one of the most well-known nutrients for sleep. Wouldn't you agree, Lise?
Yeah, for sure.
So melatonin, I have had a paradoxical effect. About 20% of the population can have a paradoxical effect when taking melatonin, which means that the melatonin actually makes you jittery and it doesn't help you fall asleep. So for years, I avoided melatonin because of that paradoxical effect. What I have found out lately, like over the last 2 years, is that a very small dose of melatonin is actually actually does in fact work for me. So Lise, I would love to have your thoughts on this, and if you think that I'm just super unique, or if this is something that you've noticed where dosing becomes significant when it comes to melatonin, and maybe you could even say a few words about high dose melatonin for cancer survivors. I've weaved 3 questions into 1.
Okay, I think I just remember 2 actually, but
Okay,
um,
okay.
so low dose melatonin. Yes, some people are sensitive to higher doses, and low doses can be quite effective for some people. Also, some people don't do well with a regular melatonin, but when they use a time release melatonin, they actually experience really good quality sleep. So that's another way to sort of approach melatonin. Um, Sometimes melatonin from a plant derived source is more effective and more tolerable than other melatonin, which a little dirty little secret in the market is that the vast majority of melatonin that's sold as a dietary supplement is actually synthesized. It's
Mm.
sort of a molecule that was originally found in natural products and then it's manufactured essentially. Um, so it's relatively rare to find true naturally derived melatonin. There is a company that only and exclusively sells plant-derived melatonin. There's some products out there that are full of concentrated cherry juice, which is somewhat higher in melatonin, still small dose, but would get some natural melatonin that way. So that's another way to improve the toleration. And then, of course, large doses, relatively large, which in oncology, most people with cancer are recommended. If they're seeing an integrative practitioner, they're probably going to be recommended to take melatonin at some point in a dose of 20 milligrams, which is much higher than what is required for sleep. But the reason for that dose is that there have been over 400 clinical trials on that dose of melatonin in the oncology setting. And the melatonin is associated with improved survival, reduced risk of recurrence, and better toleration of chemotherapy and radiation in almost all cancer types. So it's a very useful adjunct, and it has this really great side effect, which is it helps people have a good night's sleep at 20, just as if they were taking 1, 3, 5, whatever. So unless you have a paradoxical reaction, that's a very legitimate dose in the context of oncology.
Right, I'm so glad that you brought that up because that I mean, similar to magnesium, I think that when we think of melatonin, we think of, oh, well, it helps with sleep and that's it. But melatonin is a very powerful molecule, and you've just described its anti-cancer effect. It has a lot of other health benefits. So incorporating it into a sleep routine, um, either at a higher dose if you're a cancer survivor, or at a very low dose if you're like me and you can't tolerate a high dose. It's a very effective nutrient.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Okay, so do you have another strategy before we wrap this sleep show up?
Well, I'm kind of torn, to be honest, because I want to talk about 2. So I'll mention one, and then I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into the second. I want to mention mindfulness because although I think it's something you and I both talk a lot about, we've had shows on mindfulness in various forms. It's very important to obtaining good quality sleep. When people have a mindfulness practice, and it doesn't even have to be at bedtime, just having a regular practice of gaining presence and focus and calm, attentive mind can help the neurological workings of the brain in such a way that it's easier to fall asleep and stay asleep. So I would just encourage people to develop a mindfulness practice. And the one I want to spend just a fraction of a bit more time on is ashwagandha. This is another herb that's very popular right now, and deservedly so. It comes from the Ayurvedic tradition, and there are certain constitutions, or if you will, in Ayurveda that are more likely to benefit from ashwagandha than others. So I'm going to put that aside for a moment. I just want to give that a shout out, but I'm not an Ayurvedic trained practitioner. So that being said, in Western medicine, we use ashwagandha. The botanical name is Withania somnifera. So somnifera, as its second name, gives you a clue. It's somni is the Latin derivative for sleep, and it really has a very sedative effect. But it's also unique because it's in the category of plants we call adaptogens. And adaptogens are plants that help to mitigate or reset the stress response. So in the face of stress, if you're taking an adaptogen, you're less likely to get stuck in the turned on position response to stress. So your body is more likely, under the influence of an adaptogen, to respond to stressors, but then to quiet itself down and to not get stuck in this hypercortisolemic state, which is what people get stuck in when they're in chronic stress. Now, if you're in hypercortisolemic state, that means you have too much cortisol circulating. So that's going to very much disrupt your circadian rhythm, which is what I talked about at the beginning, which is the primary kind of input into the sleep cycle. Melatonin at night, cortisol during the day. If you have a stuck-on stress response system, too much cortisol, it's hard for your body to get enough melatonin secreted at the right time at night to get you to sleep. So adaptogen herbs are really helpful for sleep. And ashwagandha is nice because it has this additional sedative effect. So it's unique in adaptogens in that it can be dosed at bedtime or in the evening. It'll still help you reset that stress response system, but you'll also get the added sedative benefit.
Yeah, I mean, we've done entire shows on adaptogens. I'm so glad that you brought this one up. And there's kind of a theme here, Lise, because the strategies that we've mentioned today, you get a lot of bang for your buck, like with ashwagandha that you were just mentioning, to help you cope with stress, help you sleep, help you with a lot of different things, and what we were talking about with magnesium and melatonin. And I think that that's the beauty of natural medicine. That's the beauty of these botanicals and these nutrients. They actually benefit health on many different levels. So yeah, any final words before you thank our sponsors again, Lise?
Well, I just love that we brought this up. I think should be kind of an annual conversation for us because there's always new insights and it is such a problem for folks. So I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. And I also appreciate our sponsors. Once again, we thank Pro Thrivers Wellness Sleep Formula, Cetria Glutathione, the superior glutathione to support liver and immune health, Cognizin Citicoline to help enhance memory, focus, and attention, and Dr. Ohhira's award-winning shelf-stable probiotic. And thank you, Karolyn, for your great insights tonight. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely, and thank you as well. So this has been a great show. Okay, everyone, may you experience joy, laughter, love, and of course, sound sleep. It's time to thrive, everyone. Have a great night.